Zombies. Nazi zombies.
Auf der Heide blüht ein kleines Blümelein. Und das heißt Erika.
Directed by David Gregory and produced by Rebecca Hirani, we are talking Zombies of the Third Reich, and this is a low-budget B-movie, really, about, of course, Nazi zombies. Now, we've seen plenty of Nazi zombies up until this point. In fact, it's its own subgenre, you might say. What does this 2025 offering give us? Well, so we have occupied France, and the Nazis are doing some type of experiment to create super soldiers in a bunker somewhere in rural France. And this experiment goes wrong. The Allies, consisting of American and British troops, send a small squad in to investigate, unless they have a man on the inside, and they discover, of course, that the Nazis have in fact created zombies, and now these Allies must fight for their lives. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So this is obviously, as I mentioned, a low-budget movie, so expectations in check. Let's talk about what I think works in this movie's favour. I mean, it's kind of this somewhat popular subgenre, isn't it? If you like Nazi zombies, it's more of the same, albeit in low-budget fashion. But there is a little bit to enjoy here. It's kind of cheesy, deliberately so, I think. And obviously, this movie knows it can't really afford to do, you know, things like, you know, vehicles and big fights and things like this. So it's sort of somewhat sticking within its means. It's all kind of internal shots and stuff within corridors and stuff. You know, we see a little bit of regalia, Nazi flags and things like this dotted around to kind of give it a little bit of flavour. So, you know, there's an attempt here, I suppose, to dress up the locations to look a little bit like obviously a Nazi bunker and stuff. I mean, it's a little bit mixed reception on that, I would say, but we'll come back to that. But, you know, nonetheless, there's, you know, guys in Nazi uniforms, you know, turning into zombies. It has an element of kind of fun to it. The zombie makeup, I would say, isn't actually all that bad. I mean, these are not decomposed skeletal zombies. They're relatively sort of fresh, so there's not a huge amount of decomposition and stuff like that. But I've got to say, I think the actual makeup looks fairly good, you know, for sort of relatively kind of fresh zombies and things. And there's an attempt to add a little bit of gore here and there with, you know, intestines being pulled out and the like. So, you know, I have to say, again, when you factor the budget in mind, some of the kind of the physical applications of what it's done isn't sort of so bad here. That they wisely keep the protagonists to a relatively small group. There's 6, so we kind of get an idea of their sort of personalities and their kind of banter between them. And I would say our lead character, the guy, the lieutenant or whatever, who's kind of leading them, probably the best actor out the bunch, and the kind of maybe the female medic who goes on with them as well. You know, probably do the best in regards to acting. I mean, no one's here going to be expecting fabulous acting, are they, from a Nazi zombie film? But there's a couple here I think do better than others, shall we say. And as we get into the bunker, it's relatively action-packed, albeit it's kind of low stakes action, really, and it's never really all that spectacular. But again, when you consider this is such a low-budget movie, there's a few kind of gunfights and things like this, and fighting off zombies and the rest of it. Let's talk about what doesn't work. Now, I've mentioned there's a couple of actors who I think do a reasonable job here, but there are also some terrible acting on display here as well. So the acting goes from maybe acceptable to downright poor, with a couple of characters in particular really standing out as almost spoof-like in their portrayal of, you know, I guess 1940s way of speaking and things like this. Now, you can't really accuse this movie of being historically accurate when we kind of see this Nazi bunker and stuff. As I've mentioned, they try to dress it up with Nazi flags and all the rest of it, but obviously when you're looking at things like the tech and stuff like that, it's obviously not of its time. They've tried to use sort of 70s tech and things like this, but it's sort of obviously still far more advanced than what would have been in this period in history. So again, it's a kind of a B movie. You might not really care too much about it, but you know, it is what it is. And as I mentioned this, well, the movie does have a few kind of conflicts with the Allies and a variety of these zombies, but they're never really played up to be a particularly sort of scary element here. I mean, it's more sort of cheesy B movie than kind of actual sort of creeps and horror. You know, when you have a film like this, you have an opportunity to decide what kind of tone you want, and you could try and play these zombies to be genuinely threatening, genuinely kind of scary. What's moving around in the dark? Can't quite see it. Is that a man? But it doesn't do that. It's just kind of like cheesy zombie action, basically. So it lacks the ability to be a kind of a more serious and more engaging horror film in favour of just sort of putting the camera down and letting the kind of camera roll, really, and just filming or low budget actors coming out on sort of screen and things like this. And there are times here I feel it's a little bit too dark to really see what's going on, probably an attempt to kind of hide the budget, but there are at times it's just a little bit too dark, but at times, you know, you have like halogen lit corridors and things like this. So again, the cinematography isn't sort of fabulous, and it ends up being a bit of a kind of a silly time waster. I think there's a degree of entertainment value here. No one's going to accuse this movie of being a good Nazi zombie film. There are examples of good Nazi zombie movies, but this is not one of them. But it still has an element of entertainment value, albeit I do think this is a flawed movie in many ways, and the positives are relatively, you know, sparse, to be honest. But I will give it a 3 out of 10. Watchable if you are a fan of A, B movies, and B, Nazi zombies. So yeah, 3 out of 10. What were your thoughts if you've seen it? Let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.